Hey everybody, I'm Tony Codispoti, and this is volume 51 of the Great Vocal Majority podcast. And today, the volume is entitled Robert Mueller's Henchman. Now, Robert Mueller has a big problem, and his name is Andrew Weissmann. Now, who is Andrew Weissmann? Currently, Weissmann is in a senior management role on the special counsel team that's headed by Robert Mueller. But to say that Weissmann has a history of serious ethical and prosecutorial abuses is really an understatement. During the FBI investigation into various cases, such as the Enron case, Weissmann committed acts that resulted in the reversal, either in whole or in part, of every case he took to trial. Now, you probably haven't heard anything about that. You probably have heard that when the Enron case was brought to trial, several high-level Enron executives went to jail. But did you know that all those cases were reversed on appeal because of prosecutorial abuse? No, probably not. In the Enron case, he suppressed evidence that was exculpatory to the defense, a pattern he has shown in other cases as well. For example, in the Merrill Lynch and Arthur Andersen cases, Weissmann was also guilty of suppression of favorable evidence to the defense. Although ethics charges were taken before the New York bar, they saw it as really too hot to handle, and they kicked the case back to the DOJ, where it was whitewashed by political allies of Weissmann and later disposed. But the cases Weissmann brought and returned convictions continued to be reversed on appeal. But unfortunately, only years after the lives of thousands of people were destroyed, and I really mean thousands of people. Weissmann was responsible for the conviction of Alaska Senator Ted Stevens on corruption charges. Weissmann actually corrupted the prosecution himself, and it was reversed on appeal. It was only too late, though, because Senator Stevens, who had since resigned, was killed in a plane crash, so he never lived to see his name cleared. Weissmann also prosecuted the accounting firm Arthur Andersen for obstruction of justice in the Enron matter. Weissmann's abuse led to the dissolution of the firm, and 80,000 people who were employed by Arthur Andersen lost their jobs. Eventually, the case made it to the United States Supreme Court, where Arthur Andersen's conviction was reversed on appeal in a unanimous decision, 9-0. This is the kind of thing Andrew Weissmann sees as a win. In his prosecution of the case against Merrill Lynch, Weissmann successfully prosecuted and sent to prison 4 Merrill Lynch executives. This case, too, was reversed on appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court because, in the words of the court, quote, the indictment alleged conduct that was not criminal, unquote. And the prosecutors, namely Weissmann, quote, plainly suppressed, unquote, evidence favorable to the defense. Not only was Weissmann the director of that task force and its driving force, he was omnipresent in the courtroom, as well as the grand jury and throughout the investigation. And tragically, it took 6 years to uncover evidence that prosecutors had yellow highlighted in full recognition that it was favorable to the defense. The Obama Justice Department was complicit in this cover-up, denying that evidence even existed, though they were constitutionally, legally, and ethically bound to produce it. The evidence Weissmann suppressed directly contradicted testimony of prosecution witnesses and the prosecutor's statements to the jury. It doesn't end there. Weissmann and his colleagues put on cooperating witnesses to testify to the opposite of what their own evidence showed. At the same time, to ensure no one could or would testify freely for the defense, they repeatedly threatened to indict anyone whose view of the facts differed from their own. They also named more than 100 unindicted co-conspirators, clearly an attempt to intimidate. In fact, Weissmann's tactics are so terribly egregious, some guilty pleas were withdrawn. Still, even after all of this, the Obama, Holder, Lynch DOJ promoted Weissmann to lead the DOJ fraud division. Now that you know a little bit about Andrew Weissmann, and know he is in a leading management role in the investigation into Russian interference and or collusion with the Trump administration in the election, how confident can any American be that this investigation is being carried out fairly and free of political influence? How could Robert Mueller appoint a man with such a checkered past if he isn't planning on railroading people? Andrew Weissmann has a record that shows he railroads people, as he did with Enron, Merrill Lynch, Arthur Andersen, and Ted Stevens. The Mueller investigation is simply not legitimate. It has been corrupted by people whose ambitions have outpaced their moral compass. If there is but the slightest whiff of prosecutorial abuse in any of the more recent cases, President Trump should immediately pardon anyone convicted. I'd like to add something here because I believe it's important. I think it's important to recognize that foreign powers, as a matter of routine, attempt to influence elections. And we've done it to others, and it's been done to us. It has been reported that the scale of Russian attempts at influence in the latest election were of an unprecedented nature, and it is also important to point out that the goal of Russian influence was to foster disunity and political tumult as much as, or perhaps more, than favoring any one candidate. That's why a fair and politically neutral investigation into Russian interference is critical. But Mueller has chosen people who can neither be fair nor politically neutral. Andrew Weissmann is but one example. There are a number of others. Nearly the entire Mueller team is burdened with a countless number of conflicts of interest, which will prejudice the public's opinion regardless of the outcome of their investigation. The stench of partisanship exists throughout the Mueller team. With Weissmann, however, rather than partisanship, the infection is really blind ambition and ruthless prosecutorial abuse of power. The media has utterly failed to report fully on who Mueller's team is and their histories. The only media figure who has shed any light on this has been Sean Hannity, who is, quite obviously, a very partisan and openly conservative person, and whose opinions are just going to be dismissed as such by more left, liberal, and nonpartisan circles. But that doesn't mean he's wrong. In doing my research for this podcast, sources about Weissmann's abuses predated his naming to the Mueller team. In the documentation for this podcast, I have included a link to the complaint that was made to the New York Bar regarding Weissmann, along with other articles written before the Mueller investigation. For any investigation to be fair, a reasonable starting point is choosing investigators with a reputation for fairness. That's not Andrew Weissmann. And Robert Mueller has not conducted a fair investigation. For the Great Vocal Majority, I'm Tony Codispoti. Tap the link below this video.